Welcome back. Now we're going to do some selection that's more like a multiple choice selection as opposed to a true-false selection. So before in our if statements we had a flowchart where the diamond had a Boolean expression in it. That is, there was only two values that expression could take on, true or false. In this situation, we're going to put an integer expression inside the diamond, and obviously an integer can have many more than just two cases. And so what we'll have is a series of statements for any particular value that we care to process, and then another series of statements for another value, and perhaps another series of statements for another value, basically as many of those as we want, and then at the end we'll have some none of the above code that lets us do something opposite, or if they didn't press or use any of the values in these first n ones. Okay, so it's a multiple choice decision. We put an integer expression in the switch statement and have cases for each of the values. Now the flowchart for this really doesn't do it justice. So instead what we need to do is look at the syntax for the switch statement instead. Okay, so here's how it's going to look. We're going to have our switch keyword, and then inside a pair of parentheses we're going to have our expression, and that has to be an integer. Okay, now integer in processing can obviously mean int or long, but it also could mean char or byte. Okay, so because those are also considered to be integer types. So something that's in here that's an integer, it can't be a float or a double. Then inside a pair of curly brackets, which we do have to have, by the way, you have a series of cases. And so it'll be a case keyword followed by some integer constant. So it can't be a variable, it has to be a constant. Then a colon, and underneath that you'll have the statements that are associated with that particular case. Okay? Then traditionally, or usually, we'll put a break statement after those statements. Then you can repeat this as many times as you want for as many different constants as you care to use. And at the end, if you need a none of the above option, you put default with a colon and then the statements for the default case. Alright? Now some things to note about this. First of all, as we've said a couple of times now, you can have as many of those cases as you want. All of them have to be integer constants though. We have to think about that flow through behavior. Okay, and so what that means is, if we go back to the flowchart, if I don't have a break at the end of this set of statements, it's going to flow right into the set of statements for my second value. And if there's no break at the end of these sets, then we'll flow right into the statements for value 3, and so on. So that's why we need the break, is so that we don't flow through all the rest of the cases after we've done this one, or this one, or this one. Sometimes we want that situation. Generally speaking, you don't. Okay? In the example for the topography, where we're using fonts, we'll see a situation where we do want to use that behavior. Again, the default case is optional, so that's used when you have a none of the above situation. Something to do when the value is none of the cases that you've listed. But you don't have to have a default if you don't want it. Alright, to practice this, here's what we're going to do. We're going to assume that we have 4 images that are all the same size, and they've been loaded into class variable references, pick 1, pick 2, pick 3, and pick 4. We're also going to assume that there's a 5th variable, an alias named pick, which initially refers to pick 1, and I'll show you what that means here in a minute. And what we're going to do is write basically an application. We'll do the full up thing, but the problem statement calls for a draw method and a keypressed method that'll display the first picture if the user presses 1, the second picture if they press 2, and so on. And if they press any other key other than 1, 2, 3, or 4, we'll go back to picture 1. All right? So, first of all, let's talk about that alias business. For this example, what we're going to do is have 4 images, but 5 different variables. And one of those variables is going to be called an alias. So let's explain how that works first, and then we'll do some algorithms to show how our application will work. And we'll use a switch statement to do that. So in this case, we're going to have a total of 4 different pictures. Okay? And I'm kind of a bad movie nerd, so we'll have 4 different pictures of Godzilla. Okay? And you guys know that at this point we store images with p image objects, and so we have to have p image reference variables for every image that we want. So in this case, I've got 4 p image reference variables. Pick 1, pick 2, pick 3, and pick 4. And we'll load in our 4 separate images in setup. Okay, that's pretty standard at this point. What's different is that we're going to have a 5th p-image reference variable called pick, and it's an alias. And what that means is it points to an object that's already referred to by a different name. Okay? So at the beginning, pick, which is our alias, we'll have it refer to pick 1. So both of these variables refer to the same image. Okay? So real simply, in our draw method, all we'll have to do is something like this. So I'm skipping ahead. We don't even have to do an algorithm for this. Check it out. Here's my draw method. And I'm going to assume for right now that the window is sized exactly the same size as all these images. And let's say they're like 300 pixels tall, or wide rather, and 300 pixels tall. So they're 300 by 300, and the application's display window is the same size. In that situation, I can actually use the background method call to display an image on the background of the display window. Okay? And it's a little bit simpler than the image method because I don't have to worry about providing coordinates. So, there we go. That's all we have to do for our draw method. We're going to draw this reference variable's object in the background every time the screen is refreshed. Okay? So when the application starts up, I'll have my first image of Godzilla will be displayed. Now, why this alias is important is because if I ever change what that alias points to, this method will draw the new image without having to do any decision making inside the draw method. Okay? So for instance, if the user presses the 2 key, all we have to do is change this image, or this reference rather, to refer to pick 2, and the next time the draw method is called, pick 2 will be what's displayed. I still have pick 1 referring to the first Godzilla image, but now my alias is pointing to a different one, and so that's what's displayed. Likewise, if they press a 2 in the Keypressed method, we'll switch this alias variable to refer to the 4th image, and then the next time the draw method executes, 60 times a second, whatever, that new image will be displayed. All right, so that sort of shows how our alias is going to work. So what's left is to design the Keypressed method for this, and that's what we're going to do right now. Okay, so we're going to work on the Keypressed method, and in order to make this happen, or make this work, we're going to make a decision based on the value of the key that they actually pressed. And in the Keypressed method, that's stored in a built-in variable called key. All right? So I have to make a decision based on that value. Well, it's not a Boolean, It's going to be actually like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Q, whatever they type, that single character. So I can't do a true-false decision-making process here. I could have a nested if structure and have something like key is equal to 1. And if that's true, then I would change my alias. If it's false, I would make another check to see if key is equal to 2 and so on. And that would work. But instead of doing that, we're going to use the switch statement. So let's draw the flowchart first, and then I'll sketch out what the actual switch statement itself is going to look like. Okay? Flowcharts for switch statements are a little weird because we have multiple options, but kind of goes like this. If the value of the key that they pressed is equal to 1, then what we need to do is switch our alias to point to picture 1. Okay, like that. If the value that they typed was 2, then I would do the same thing, except I would set my alias to refer to picture 2. Same for picture 3. And finally, for picture 4. But then we also had a default case in the requirements. And that would be when they don't type any of the above. So they press some key that's not 1, 2, 3, or 4. And the problem statement said that in that situation, we want to make our pick variable refer to pick 1. Okay? And then after any of these, we'll go ahead and be done with our keypressed method. Okay? So that's how a flowchart for this might work. And again, flowcharts for switch statements aren't particularly useful. So let's just go ahead and slap up some pseudocode that's going to look a lot like the actual syntax for this switch statement. Okay? Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take this keypressed method and design how it's going to work using some pseudocode instead of a flowchart. So we're going to perform a switch on the key value, and if it's a 1, then we'll set our picture alias to pick 1. I guess I don't need semicolons in pseudocode, but you get the idea. But then we're also going to take into account that idea of the flow-through behavior and put a break statement here. And what that means is after I've made this assignment, I want to ignore the rest because I've already made my choice. And then we repeat a similar thing for each of the other cases. Okay, and then we would indicate our default situation at the very end, and this is the one that's sort of the none of the above choice in a multiple choice situation. So now I would set my pick equals to pick 1. And I don't need a break since it's the last thing in the switch statement. Okay? So in my keypressed method, we're going to make a decision based on the key. If it's pressed 1, then we'll make our alias point to picture 1. If they press 2, it'll point to picture 2. Picture 3 for case 3, picture 4 for case 4. And if they didn't pick any of those keys or press any of those keys, we'll set the default picture back to picture 1. Okay? Great. So this will be actually very simple to implement. Let's go ahead and write the application. Application here based on the design that we just did. I have a processing program already saved named switch example. I don't want to name it just switch because then that would confuse processing. You'd have a processing program named the same as a keyword, and that would be bad. In any case, it's named switch example. And I have already prepared my 4 Godzilla images. I've named them A, B, C, and D .jpg. So I'll drag those onto the IDE and add them to the sketch. Alright, so when we did our design, oops, that's really weird. In any case, when we did our design, we had 5 total variables, 4 for the images, and 1 as an alias. So I'm just going to declare those. Pick as the alias, pick 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll hold the 4 Godzilla images. Then in setup, what we need to do is give those initial values and size the screen. So we'll do the screen sizing first. Like we said at the whiteboard, each of the images is 300 by 300, so we'll make the application window the same, and then we'll load our images. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is a little cut and paste to save myself some time. Alright, now I've got my 4 images loaded. I want to make my alias refer to the first image to start with, and that's all I need for setup. As we showed on the whiteboard as well, draw, super simple. Since the images are all the same size as the display window, I can just use the background method and the alias reference to display the particular picture that's being referred to. So I'm going to save this and run it. And right now we should see our first image of Godzilla in the window. Now it doesn't do anything to change the images yet, but it will as soon as we add our Keypressed method. Add a little bit of comments in here so I can keep track of where the end of all these methods are. Okay, in Keypressed, we're going to do our decision making with a switch statement. So it starts with the switch keyword, and then the key variable, which contains the value of the key that they actually pressed. All of our switch statements need to have a set of curly brackets, so I'll put that in first. And then inside the switch, we should have case statements. So if they pressed the 1, then what we're going to do is show image 1 by making our alias point to picture 1. And then we want to have our break statement so that we don't accidentally continue on through all the other cases. Okay. The other 4 cases then are going to be very similar. So again, I'm just going to save some time by doing a cut and paste and then editing these appropriately. So when they press a 2, I'll make the alias point at picture 2. 3 will be picture 3. 4 will be picture 4. And then the last thing we need to add is our default situation, and for that we're going to return to picture 1. And I don't need a break in this case because this is the last thing in the switch statement. Alright, so let's see how this works. Save it and run it, and there's my first image. Now if I press the 2 key, I see the second image. 3, I see the third. 4, I see the fourth. 1 goes back to 1. There's no particular order that I have to do that in, so here's 3, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 4, etc. And if I press anything else, like for instance I'm pressing Q it goes back to picture 1, and that's the default case. Alright, so this shows you how to do a switch statement. Really quick, let's take a look at what would happen if we don't put breaks in. So I'm just going to comment the breaks out for right now. And I want you to predict what you think is going to happen. Okay? So it starts out showing picture 1, and now I'm going to press a key. Oh, I still see picture 1, even though I pressed a 2. I still see picture 1, even though I pressed 3. Still see picture 1, even though I pressed 4, or D, or S, or Z. Well, what if I change this to the third picture for the default case? Now see if this helps you to troubleshoot. Now I press a 1, and I see picture 3. Press 2 and I see 3. 3 and I see 3. 4 and I see 3. Any other character, I see 3. So what happens is, doesn't matter what case we enter, we make that change, but then we flow through, make this change, make this change, make this change, and ultimately go to the last thing in the switch, which was the default case. And so picture 3 is what we always see. Okay? So flow-through behavior, something we have to watch out for. Almost always you want to break at the end of each of your cases in the switch statement. Alright, what we're going to do next then is move on to something that's a little more processing specific. Our next video will be all about typography, using fonts and displaying those in the display window.